Oh gosh, hello, hello, hello. It is going to be hopefully a very, very chilled out day. I mean, we're going to do stuff that feels a little bit hard today. So hopefully we're going to have a chill little time while we're doing it. Today, it is still rather warm where I'm based, and we do not build homes for cool and comfort here. So if y'all see me sort of droop towards the end of this, I'm fine and everything's fine. But really, really exciting. Today, we're going to do a ton of theory. Theory, 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 theory. If you read this and understood it and you took good notes, great. Maybe you need to, maybe this is a day to go have a little bit of a nap. I'm so excited to go through with this with all of y'all, but listening to me talk about stuff you've already seen in your notes might not be what makes your soul sing. So feel free to stick with us. And if you're watching after the fact, yeah, we're not doing a whole bunch of live interactive stuff today. Today, we are going to talk about how CSS works in relation to cascading. So this concept of, hey, the rules you set will sort of trickle through your site. Ooh, that's exciting. And we're going to talk about inheritance. The exciting things are, both these concepts are really kind of wubby. Lots of times, why was this inherited? Why doesn't this work? Really, really good. We're also going to learn two different cheats that I don't want you to overuse because it's tempting to overuse those. The first one we're going to talk about is, oh gosh. Everything's fine. I'm clearly going to sneeze as soon as I'm not paying attention. My apologies. It's also, so it's heat wave season here in the UK, but also time for allergies. It's a real fun, real exciting time. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is specificity. And I had a really hard time describing this conceptually. So if it's okay, I'm going to ask those of you who are here with us live to give me feedback like, hey, what is that? What do you mean as we go? But I'm also going to lovingly bring Edda on to the stage to see, just to get some real-time feedback. Edda, hello. Oh, you're still muted. Oh.
Okay, perfect. Hi everyone.
Hey. So you're our technical expert. You do all of the behind the scenes sort of operation stuff for the boot camp. Thank you and hello. Oh, hello again. We chat a lot. I was hoping I could try and describe this to you and what's going on and have you be like, yes, no, or just try this again when it doesn't quite work yet. And we can explain it as many times as we like. And if it just doesn't make sense, that might be okay too. So it's possible in CSS to have multiple style rules applied to the same element. But we need to CSS needs to have a way to sort of decide which one has the highest ranking, which one wins. So specificity, the same way that we want our HTML elements to be as specific as possible, we also give more weight in CSS to more specific CSS rules. Does that make sense so far?
Kind of does. I mean, this is confusing. Yeah.
So CSS specificity, we can sort of award A, B, C, D scores. And we can think about these in terms of, like, if you grew up in an education system that has A, B, C, D as grades, this might be especially useful as a model to think about this. So if you have an HTML element, if you have a paragraph element, and you've got multiple different CSS rules that could apply to it, if you have an A rule, it'll win. It'll beat all the other rules and they won't get applied. If you don't have an A rule, but you have a B and D rule, the B will win and the D won't be applied. Usually these, and we'll talk in just a second about, oh gosh, we've got a really good question. And I'm going to save that to the end if that's okay. Usually we talk about an A, B, and C, not A, B, C, D, and we've got the link to MDN looking at that, but we'll stick with the 4 part. And we give 1 or 0 score to each of these columns, A, B, C, D, okay? A, B, C, D. And y'all can't see super well. This is mostly me thinking out loud as we go. So each value can have a 1 or a 0. So by default, all of these have zeros in them, right?
Yes. Sorry.
So the A column gets a point, gets a 1, if there's an inline style. Okay. And I like to remember this as, oh, inline styles are the most accessible type of style. They're right there in your HTML code, so they get an A grade. Oh yeah, I really like this. Smells like, oh, you know what, we could think of this. I'm terribly sorry, sir. Excuse me, sir. Thank you, sir. We could think of this as a tally system. Yeah, so like, if you have an inline style, it gets a tally in the A column, although everyone's only getting 1 tally, and it automatically wins. Although we talked about how we don't really love using the inlines. But then the B, C, and D are based on what type of selector it is. So an ID selector, which is real specific, right? An ID selector would count as 1 in the B column. So B would get 1 tally here, which means if there's an inline style and an ID selector competing, who would win?
So that will be the inline style.
Okay. And the C here, who gets, so we're going from most specific to least specific types of selectors. Who gets a point in the C?
So that will be class selectors, attribute selectors, and pseudo classes.
And we can remember the C for class.
Yes.
Oh.
That makes a lot of sense.
And because we're coming most to least specific, like the type selectors are probably going to be D?
Sorry, I was distracted by the chat.
Oh,
can you ask
terrible,
that again?
Terrible.
Yeah.
So if we're going from most specific to least specific, so inline styles is a tally for A, IDs are a tally for B, classes for C, because of C, and then D would be...
Will be type selectors. Yes,
cool.
the one that we use for selecting elements based on the tag, the HTML tag, and along with pseudo elements and universal selectors, but that's kind of different. So we're going to talk about that later.
Stunning. So that all feels a lot better than how I was trying to work it out myself. So having this sort of tally and saying, cool, we have multiple styles applying to this element. Which one's going to win? Or why did this turn out like this? Can be a really, really useful one. I really appreciate it. Let's look at this. So here we've got some HTML, got our body with a class of body class, section, class of section class, div, class parent class, and then my element. Okay. So here, if we said, oh, cool. So if we set a rule with any of the other classes here, we get a bunch of tallies in the C section, but 4 tallies in the C section doesn't beat 1 more specific one. Does that make sense?
Yes, and this is also a bit like the unit system in mathematics when you think about it. So the first one will be 100 points. And the second example will be 40 points. if that
Okay,
makes
so
sense.
if we think of these tallies as like a number
Whole
system,
numbers?
so
Yeah,
whole
exactly.
number. So here, 4 points in the C section would give us 40, but 1 point in the B section gives us 100. Which wins?
Exactly. I mean, that
Oh,
makes a better
I mean,
sense, I think.
it's still, and there's we're going to learn in a bit some ways to override this and some other rules. So yeah, this is terrible, but this is terrible in a way we can deal with. Etta, thank you so much for working with me to test my knowledge, and I will let you go in just a second.
Yes.
Bye.
Okay. So I'm going to continue hiding backstage, everyone. But I see a good question actually, Jess. So maybe
Oh,
we can talk about this before I go.
you know what? Oh yeah, because we're going to talk about universal selectors in a second later in these notes. I'm so sorry. So why? So yeah, why are universal selectors listed as both 1 and 0? I thought they were 0.
I think that's they're on 0 as well.
Oh,
So
fantastic.
yeah, but
Yeah.
yeah, so
So
it's not 1, it's only 0. The universal
yeah.
selectors have the lowest specificity, so they don't contribute anything. So it
Okay.
will be only
So
0.
Mel is saying, hey, think the universal selector, which we haven't learned yet, we're going to cover in our notes in a second, might indeed be 0. So yeah, you get no points in the battle of who's going to win for using the universal selector. It is the least specific. Amazing. We'll
That's
see you
perfect.
later. Thank
All
you,
right.
Etta, and
See
thank
you.
you for helping me help this make sense.
Of course. Bye, everyone.
Okay, so thank you very much for Etta. Like, do not deserve her. She's so good. Okay, so we had a question that was, oh gosh, we've got a heck ton of questions. And go ahead and drop any questions in. So say, hey, if you have 2 elements that use the same ID by mistake, do you know what? It'll still change both. If you have 2 elements that use the same ID, you're probably, please don't have 2 elements that have the same ID. Thank you. So this question, I don't know. So are attributes also for C along for classes? So would type button be 1 tally in the C column? I'm not super duper sure. We could test that, and I recommend, I bet, I've got edit typing in the background, but no pressure. We could test that by setting up a setup where we've got a D level, a universal selector, and then adding an attribute for everything with the type of button. Can we set things to, hmm, hmm, yeah. We can use input type button. So input type button and then some CSS code is correct. Like, it will work, it looks like. But yeah, I think we would, if we have time, we'll have a look at this to try it out. So yeah, I don't know if setting something like assigning a rule to type button in that way would count as a C or D. We could come back to that if that's okay. Cool. So type selectors are when we talk about HTML tags or HTML elements, remember that HTML tags are just two HTML elements that have two different, like a start and a finish. These here, we're always going to be thinking about CSS applying to the HTML element, and the tags are just the different components of the element here, if that's okay. Yeah, I think Jane's pointing out that universal selectors in the coursework seems to be listed as D. Let's see if we can test these out. Yeah. And Mel's saying, hey, the pseudo element and the pseudo classes are still confusing. We have not learned about pseudo elements and pseudo classes. So these are going to feel weird anyway. But generally, the pseudo element, which I promise we'll learn about, the pseudo element selectors should be a B, because they are a type, but a pseudo type. And we'll learn about it. And the pseudo classes should be a C, because they're pseudo, and we'll learn about it, but they're still classes, if that's okay. Y'all ask some good questions. Oh gosh, for late joiners, hey, nobody's late. Oh, actually, I'm so sorry. For late joiners, I'm gonna ask y'all to review the video, just so folks watching this later don't have to go through it twice. So, but you haven't missed much. We're just on the second theory section, which is what is a universal selector? So if you've ever used a star to search for something, so if you're searching for something in your computer and you say, oh gosh, where is the star on my keyboard? This is what we get for switching keyboards mid-class. So if I wanted to search on in my computer file system for a star.pdf, this here is the universal selector in a bunch of different places. I'm saying, hey, computer file system, give me anything you have that has the file system.pdf. Or maybe I'm looking for a file I know I saved under the name cookie recipe. But yep, so here, universal selector and wildcards in search are the same thing. So here, I can also say, I know I saved a file called cookie recipe, but I don't remember the file type. I can use this star as sort of this universal selector. Give me anything you got that's a PDF, or give me anything you've got with the name cookie selector. Yeah. Here, but with our CSS, instead of saying, so the star in search means give me anything. In CSS, the universal selector, so in search, the asterisk is give me anything that matches a little. In CSS, you're not asking for something, you're giving a style, you're assigning a style. And instead of it being anything, it's everything. So if I say, oh gosh, I see people in the chat talking about regular expressions. Regular expressions are a form of programming that is really rules-based, and some people love them, and some people die on the inside every single time we look at them, and I am the die on the inside type. So I'm real happy to tell you we are not doing them in this course. We're free for now. So here I'm going to add some code into the chat. If I had a CSS selector, and it was the universal selector, I'd be like, hey, apply this everywhere. And I want to set the background color to pink. What's going to be pink? Ooh, actually, I just told you that everything on this page, unless it's been given, and unless the individual elements have been given a more specific designation through this ABCD, everything. Mel's just like, oh, and this was what I was going to ask. What will turn pink? Mel's just like, every single thing. Daniel's just like, look, every single background element is going to be turned to pink. And the second thing I was going to ask is, what element are we applying things to when we use this universal selector? And Mel's just like, hey, we are applying. When we use the universal selector, we're setting rules to the HTML element on our page. Nice. And all of its children, unless there's any more specific rules that apply to some of those elements. Nice. This isn't the best approach to write your HTML. Write your CSS. And like, let's start off with everything pink and make it more specific. Generally, when you see this used, it's either to say, I wanted to start with some base styles and then make things more specific from there. But another reason we might use this is when we've gotten stuck to say, hey, I have this web page. And actually, do you know what happens a lot is I've got a CSS file and it's got so many lines of CSS in it. Something's gone wrong and I don't know what. I want to sort of reset these styles a little bit. I'm going to set the universal selector with a value to see what's going on. If we do the universal selector, and do background. Oh, is it? Mel's saying, oh, if we use the HTML type selector, only the HTML element itself, and not descendants, not child elements, would inherit that. Whereas startup background and setting rules with the universal selector includes all the descendants. And that's really important to include. Thank you. So a useful way to do this is if you want to set the margin and padding for the whole document. Say, look, a lot of browsers will have a default margin or a default padding set. If you're like, no, I don't want to mess with this, it can be really, really useful too. Go ahead and set that. Jacob's like, what about body? Heck yeah, body. We could also use body as a type selector. I think, oh wait, heck. Yeah, we can also use this as a type selector. And I'm not sure how inheritance would work with that. I think we should, let's go ahead and save this in our questions to the end, and let's save this as one of the ones to have a little bit of a play with. So we'll see what this looks like. And Yulita is saying, so this means if we set using the universal selector, if we set a left and right auto margin, will all elements be centered in their own containers? Let's also save this to play with in a second, if it's okay. All of these, like, what if, I think I want to see these in action, if that's okay. So going back to, yeah. So we're up. Michelle, I'm going to save this because we're going to talk about this in just a second. So I'm just saving some of these questions that are really, really useful. To be fair, all of these are super useful. So common setting the margin to 0 and padding to 0, overriding a browser or browser's default. But, and this was a question earlier, this comes lowest in the hierarchy. So the A, B, C, D rule we learned at the top of the session, it gets a 0. There are no points awarded for saying, hey, do this everywhere. Any type of selector will override will be overridden by the universal selector. So let's say we've only got a paragraph element, and then we use the universal selector to turn it green. If we use a more specific selector here, even though this is a type selector, this gets us a tally in the D column, this is not very specific, it still wins over the universal selector. Let's come back here. All right. So here we're talking generally. So we touched on a bit about type selectors and specificity in our sort of A, B, C, D 4-column tally game. It doesn't feel like a game. It feels very high stakes. Here, it's saying, hey, and we're talking about type selectors, types of elements. These are going to be used to select elements based on their tag name or their element name. And these have the lowest specificity. These get us 1 point in the D column. All right. But what about class? What about class? Cool. Like we talked about at the top of the class. Class selectors are more specific than type selectors, but they're less specific than ID, and everybody gets overruled by inline styles. So whoop, they would get us 1 point in one tally in the C column, C for class. Okay. Continuing to hop along. We kind of covered this in what about class, but what about IDs? IDs, every single time you use an ID, ooh, Jane, you're amazing. Does changing the order of these do anything? Fantastic. We haven't gotten there yet, but yes, sometimes the same way there's a hierarchy for these tallies, a hierarchy of specificity, there's also a hierarchy of how these decisions get made. And that'll be the last thing we talk about in this session. So this is such a good question. Sorry. So what about IDs? Whenever you create an ID for an HTML element, that should be, yes, unique. It is like a first name, middle name, last name, name tag at a party. It's technically possible that there's another Jesslyn Rose who's going to show up at the party, but not my party, not the party I'm having on my HTML page. Each of these name tags for your elements should be unique, so they are even more specific for a class. Remember, type selectors, those apply to all of the elements of the same type. Nice? Remember that a class is like a club that you can put a bunch of elements into it, specifying you and you and you and you. And you put them in this class to be able to set rules, set CSS style rules for all of them. Matthew's just like, oh yeah, these classes, you can say everybody in this club is dressed the same. But an ID, that's that name tag, or that's your badge at work. So these are supposed to be unique. So they're even more specific than a class, than a club that has other folks in it. So if you have multiple different CSS rules that apply to the same element, but one of them's an ID, they're going to win. Ooh. So when using external style sheets, does the so if we link to more than one, I actually don't know this. I'm going to check. So if we link to more than one style sheet, does the second style sheet or the last style sheet linked, will that overrule? Let's save this to the end. I think yes. Oh, great. And our technical expert behind the scenes also says yes. So yes, it will. And y'all might be asking, why would I have multiple style sheets? Maybe you're using some libraries maybe you're using some resources on an external style sheet, but those style sheets will be loaded in order. Oh, thank you, Edda. See, we got to definitely get Edda to fully replace me. It would be really nice. So there is a cheat, and it's not really cheating. I was going to say there's no pass or fail in web development. That's not true, because accessibility audits using Lighthouse, if you don't make your website accessible enough, that feels like the only real way to fail, doesn't it? Wait, I think the only two ways to fail are if you don't make your website accessible, and one thing that I see learners do a lot, and one thing I do a lot, is I just need to work on this a little bit more. I'll put it up tomorrow. I'll put it up next week. I just need to finish it. I just need it to be a little bit better. The two ways to kind of fail at building a web project is to not get it up and live and out in the world. You're never going to feel ready. Actually, Edda's backstage, and she's too young to remember this, so I won't have to see her horrified face when I say this. When we first started building websites, we had the mindset that you would make a website and it would be finished one day. There were these little animated GIFs of road signs and a little guy digging to say, oh, this website's under construction. It's going to be finished soon. We still had a really publishing mindset that one day this website would be ready. It would be finished. But excuse the mess till then. The only real two ways you can fail are not to have your website accessible enough, but also not to have your website up. You're never going to think it's ready. Put it live now. Make a mess. So you're not failing and there's no cheating, but gosh, this feels like cheating. And the reason I want to discourage you from doing this a lot is this is sort of an emergency override. And if you're doing this a lot, your emergency overrides will crash into each other. So when you're writing your CSS, and what can often happen is, cool, I want to change the style of this one specific element. But there's a whole bunch of other CSS in here, and there's a whole bunch of inheritance rules. I don't know why. Everything I do doesn't, writing an ID and applying a style to the ID doesn't change it. Rawr. If you get stuck, and you need to override everything else, the important keyword says, hey, look, I want to set a CSS rule for this element right here. And I want you to ignore everybody else on the page. I want you to ignore the default styles. I want you to ignore the type selectors that might apply. I want you to ignore the class selectors that might apply. I want you to ignore the ID selectors that might apply. I want you to ignore inline styles that might clash with my instructions. When I say important, I mean just this. This should overrule everyone else. It's like a veto, but reverse. This is a really good way to approach it. So Mel's saying, you know what? If I'm using important, it gives me a little bit of a hint that maybe I need to stop and look at the way my code is laid out and think about how it got here. So it's a little bit like just chucking a bunch of divs in your HTML. It's real easy and it's real fast, but it doesn't underline the level of knowledge that I'd like y'all to have. Oh, I love this. This is some really cute pseudocode. So this pseudocode is any type of code that isn't really code and sometimes can be quite cute. And Samadi is saying, oh, the universal selector is saying accessibility is set to true, and that's important. So here the pseudocode is saying, hey, across the board, it is important. Boom, it overwrites everything else, that the accessibility is okay. Oh, this is so interesting. So we won't get too much into this, but y'all know that a lot of email development, and you might be thinking, oh, that's so cursed. There's developers for emails. Yeah, there are email dev and email content jobs that include knowing HTML and CSS. And Michelle's saying, oh, this is why email signatures that have CSS tend to use inline. Oh, this may well be. I don't have a ton of experience with email CSS for emails, but this feels like it might be a really reasonable reason for that. Okay, so important overrules everyone else. Important is the tool we use when we are frustrated. We're like, look, I need that div to be blue, and it's important. I'm tired. It's 4:55. I'm going home. Just turn blue. It doesn't change the specificity value of the selector, but it means it will overrule everything else. We should try not to use it, A, because it suggests that we don't understand our CSS as it's written, but also if you have a big CSS file and use important once, or maybe twice, you can probably get away with it. But gosh, when you start using the important thing, it's real easy to reach for it every time you get a little tiny bit of frustration or a little tiny bit of friction and say, this is important, this is important. When you start having 7 or 8 importance on a page, the importance are going to clash themselves. Okay, so the cascade algorithm. Oh, so the same way we've got a hierarchy of A, B, C, D tallies based on specificity to see which style will win when there are multiple styles being applied to the same element, we also have a cascade of how those styles are applied. Yeah. And let's look at, so the first thing it'll do is the browser will find styles that apply to an element by filtering out other rules and say, hey, I'm looking for things that apply to this element where there's nothing else that applies. We're okay, cool, cool, cool. But also, it's going to weight the origin source. So the default style, so like the default style of your H1, H2, H3, and styles set by user, and then the styles written by the author. So these get more specific each time. But also the important of each rule. This is really, really good. So I'm so sorry. You all just constantly get me saying, this is a good question, this is a good question, which makes this is a good question, which is less helpful for folks in real time watching the review. I'll get to that in just a second. And then, so here's the order in which these styles are cascading. So first, the browser will find styles that apply to the element by filtering out other rules. And then it'll look at where those are coming from. And the more specific that is, the more likely they are to overwrite them. So if a user sets a style and it's different than browser finding styles that would apply to the element by filtering out of the rules, number 2 will win. Then your browser will check to say, hey, do I see the important keyword over here? The important keyword is just going to rule over everybody else. And then we've got these rules of specificity applied to say, okay, cool. If you have a type selector that's giving us a different value than some of these other ones, we'll pay attention to that unless we see that important keyword. If the rules have the same level of specificity, the styles are based in order of appearance of the rule. The rule that comes later is applied, the order of appearance. And this means, and this happens a lot. So let's say I've got code where, let's come in here. Okay, so we've got an example paragraph element. Oh gosh, let's start to play with this a little bit. Oof, I don't want any of these. These are the built-in default things that bring me no joy. Can y'all see? Okay, let's make this a little bit bigger. Wait, I've lied. I'm going to finish the rest of these. I'm going to finish the rest of our notes, and then we're going to come over to the sandbox and play with this to get a better idea, if that's okay. Mel said this mentions media queries, but doesn't talk much about this. Cool. We will definitely throw our earbuds onto the floor. And Mel pointed out that we saw media queries mentioned, but we don't really talk about it much. And this is because we haven't learned about media queries yet. I know I sound just like I did when we talked about CSS, but we'll get there soon, I promise. Do media queries get evaluated first at determined device? You know what? I'm not entirely sure. I think we think that maybe media queries are weighted before selecting or finding the element, but we're not super sure. Yeah. If this is not a weird, if this is not sort of a dodge, can you, like in your notes, save this question? Because I want to come back to this when we talk about media queries, and I don't want to forget if that's okay. Yeah, so right now I'm not super sure, and I don't want to accidentally confuse things with media queries introducing before we do. So, how does inheritance work as a cheat sheet? Inheritance is something you're going to see again and again and again in programming. And we've already talked about some of the concepts that really make it work. So, the idea that you can have parent elements and child elements, this gives us an idea about how very, very broadly this would work. So, hey, the same way a grandparent might pass something down to your parent, who would then pass something down to you, CSS can pass things through children, but not all the time by default. So, child elements can inherit properties from their parent elements. Some of these properties are by default. So, if you set a color, by default, your browser's thinking, or your user's browser says, cool, you set this color for the parent, or you set this color for the universal selector. I'm just going to apply it to all the children. Font family, line height, these are often inherited by default, which means we can change that. Properties like margin or padding or border and background, these are not by default. And here, the default behavior means it's not automatically passed from parent to child. But we have a inherit keyword. So we can change the default inheritance to say, hey, we can use the inherit keyword. Let's see. Now I'm going to grab the documentation with the inherit keyword. And the inherit one is just a really fun way to say, do you know what the default is? We don't inherit this. But if I'm in a child element and I set the color to inherit, which is inheritable by default anyway, that's less helpful. If I set the, which one did it say? The margin is not inheritable by default, but if I'm in a child element, I can set the margin to margin to inherit. And here I'm saying, look, I do want to set the margin, but I'm tired. Just go ahead and set it to whatever I set the margin in the parent element to. Y'all sort yourselves out. Inheritance is really, really useful for reusability and consistency. So the same way that we said, the longer your CSS file gets, the more code that you've written in there, the more difficult it is to understand this A, B, C, D specificity matrix and who's going to win. But also you get more and more code to clash with each other. Oof. This is so much. And we're going to come back to inheritance again and again and again. Oh, Mel. Mel points out that the MDN website, which is like the Wikipedia for web developers, has a note that always documents whether or not the property is automatically inherited. Do you know what? I've got some friends who work on that team, so I'm going to compliment them again. So far we covered so much. Just really, really broadly, I'm going to ask y'all, what is the weirdest thing we covered? So A, hit me with any questions y'all have. But what's like the weirdest thing where you were like, you know what, we learned about this, and I thought this was weird, or the coolest thing? And these, often the weirdest thing and the coolest thing can be the same thing. So far, we looked at a bunch of CSS basics. We talked about when CSS is inline. And do you know what we just today? We learned that inline always wins for specificity. or when we write it internally at the top of our HTML file, or externally where we link out to a style sheet. We talked a little about these width and height properties, different types of combiners, being able to specify the parent or the child of this element or the siblings. We talked about inline and inline block elements, margins and padding, and CSS specificity today. Oh, Mal's saying, like, do you know what? The symbols are often weak. Like, right? The fact that these have like a syntax. I computer languages aren't human languages. But they do have their own syntax. They do have their own grammar. And that can be super duper weird as we get used to them. And to be fair, they can stay super duper weird even if we're not used to them. We're coming here and you know, I might have made this a little tiny bit too big. Okay, so here, I've got a div. Let's try, okay, doc type HTML. And this is me being a bit rubbish because I don't have all of our boilerplate in here. I've got a div. I'm going to set the class to I'm going to set it to example paragraph. And I'm going to make a div in here, even though I'm doing exactly what I say we shouldn't do, which is make a bunch of divs. Okay, so here we've got a couple, so the div here, we'll set a class to I'm going to change this to say div p just to make it a little bit easier. Okay. Okay, so this one might be really, really useful to talk about briefly. So this is something I thought was weird as well. So Jane's saying, you know what, something that felt a little weird to them was that setting a rule for everything on the page had a lower priority, lower specificity. It scored lower on this A, B, C, D scale than applying it to an individual element. Seemed weird. And think about that. Oh, a good way to think about this might be thinking about when a rule gets set at a school or a company. So I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to set a rule for everybody during lunch. Everybody at lunch, so every single one of you, at lunchtime, nobody can get up and walk around. And then in my school rules, in the school in my heart, which sounds terrible so far, you can't get up and walk around at lunch. What a terrible. But if I'm saying, hey class, here's a class rule. Class is wrong. Here's a school rule. Every single one in the school, nobody can get up and walk around during lunch. And then I set another rule to say, school monitors. So the class of people who are helping out at school and teachers, the class of teachers, they are allowed to walk around. Or teachers have to stand at the front of their class table. Okay, we set a rule for the whole school saying you have to sit down, except where we set a more specific rule for teachers saying, okay, you do have to stand up at the front of your class table. So yeah, it's sort of a bottom-up specificity, a reverse CSS. So here, when you set a more general rule, I say, hey, this applies to everyone, unless I've spoken to you individually, or unless I've spoken to you more specifically, if that seems okay. Oh, in my example, freecodecamp.org. And let's play with this a little bit. Let's look at the questions we had. So here we've got a question. If we have something like div.container button and div button submit, yes. Sorry, I just wanted to read this to make sure I was doing this right. So hypothetically, if we have in our same CSS, we have two different rules, and one says the div container button. So here, this div with the class of container, the button in it, and this is correct, would have 1 point in the C for the class and 2 points in the type for div and container. But div button with the ID of submit would get 1 point in the B column because it's using an ID, and it is indeed going to. Oh, and we had a question. What about body? How are we going to do this with body? Nice. That is a good point. This actually makes a really solid point that I don't get to cheat, and I do have to include our HTML. Oh, and I would close our HTML after body. So let's try this. Let's set some style rules and see where they clash. We're going to set a rule for the universal selector. Oh, and this is, set that to background color, pink. Why is the universal selector not working here? Gosh, how do I close you? That is not helpful. I'll just squidge you down. It's going to be a whole day all day. Oh, sorry. Edda very rightly and correctly was just like, Jess, backstage. I was looking so hard at my screen and frowning that I completely ignored that. And I think if I look at the chat, all of y'all are going to be yelling about this as well. Sorry. I did read the chat eventually. So that we did not link. And this is the most rookie move, but I will never stop being a rookie. Oh. And the ref here is styles.css. Okay, now you act right. Yeah. I would like to close you, but that seems to not be an option right now because everything is terrible. Nice. Okay, we're free. Okay, so we've got that. And then we had a question from Jacob saying, what about body? So what if we use a CSS rule for body? How is that going to clash? So I think that, before we do this, what do we think this is going to do? So if, oh heck, I'm going to bring you back. I'm so sorry. If I set the background color of body to blue, y'all tell me, what do you think this is going to do? Yeah. And while I ask you that, because there's a delay, Mel had a quick question. Are the attributes for C along for the classes? So would type button also get us one tally in the C column? And yes, it would. Yeah, y'all think so? So I'm seeing some folks say that they think that body is going to win. Oh, heck. We're going to do a body type selector. And we saw nothing happen yet. Oh, heck. Yep. So we're saying, hey, do you know what? Body is an element, which is more specific than the universal selector. So we think it'll change to blue. Ooh, and Mel's got an advanced one to say, well, you know what? Depends. If the body has a margin by default, we will see the body turn blue, but then we would see a little sort of, not a border because it's not a border, but it would look like a border for the HTML. Yeah, let's check. That's not what I expected. Is it that Code Sandbox is just being dreadful? Huh. Oh, I do like this because this gives us an example that I have been telling y'all this whole time. Rectangles, 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 and stressfully, working with CSS really shows us those rectangles. So this is showing where those divs are, those div elements are overwriting the background color. Yeah, I felt like, hey, let's go ahead and set the body, the margin on the body to a 2. Because did background color, I'm just checking I'm checking MDN right now. Background color, is this, oh, I want to be over here. Ah, ha, 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 ha. So what got me is, I'm good. So Michelle, let's try this, but here is what got us. When we set, let me come back to my code. Sorry, the ha 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 laughter is not very helpful. So here, when we set something using the universal selector, it's the weakest, but it's the weakest with a little superpower. It's saying, hey, please go ahead and give this to all of the children of the universal element. And this body doesn't inherit, it doesn't pass this down to its children. I think, because like when we specified a div background color, we did see this. Yeah, let's try adding a margin. Did you want that to be view height? My apologies. So let's just see if the issue is that we didn't have. Every day is a journey. Why is this happening? Everything is terrible. Let's try adding a border. Okay. Yeah. Oh, and Mel makes a real solid point to be like, look, 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 look. This is really giving us a tired little day, huh? Oh, oh, heck, 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 my apologies. Y'all are hearing me struggle, but so here we got the very, very good advice to let's go ahead and make sure that the body is showing things off. And when we make the body 100% of the view height, it's covering all the additional content. Yeah, let's give it a height and width because right now it's real, real tall, but imaginary width. And this is these are both relative. Um, these are both relative measurements. So it's not 100 pixels, which is always 100 pixels, but this is 100% of the viewport height. So 100% of this box here, and 100% of the viewport width. That's nice and weird. Ah ha ha ha. So, there is a way to bring things to the foreground versus background. But I'm so sorry, I am going to wait and introduce these later. Yeah, let's just try the height property. Make it, okay. So giving it some height because the elements, the child elements within it already have some width. And here it's 100% of the parent. So, okay. But you still don't want to be blue, do you? Ooh, hoo, hoo, hoo. We could do something real cursed. Y'all want to do something real cursed? You want to do something we absolutely shouldn't do? Actually, I'll ask you. I don't really get why this isn't turning blue. And I would quite like this to be blue. Can y'all give me a way to make this blue properly? Let's see if using important. That's wild. Is that because? Hmm. Okay, okay, okay. Hmm. 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 Let's see if it's the universe. Okay. Y'all. So this is interesting. So the HTML, nothing's really changing. With the HTML, we've got HTML, we've got our head, oh, heck, 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 which links to our style sheet. In our body, we've got a couple of divs and some paragraphs, a paragraph and a link. But even though the universal selector should be the least important, but it should hit the least, like if it's a boxing match, it's our weakest fighter. It's, yeah, and Yulido makes a really good point. Like this might be browser specific. The preview in here might be real weird. And Jane, after my own heart, is like, Jess, you know what? This is not very accessible. The contrast on this is rubbish. You're right. You're right. So let's go ahead and see what happens when we apply multiple rules. And let's say light blue. Gosh, is that not a real color? Let's make the background color the div pink. All the divs. Thank you. Let's, ooh, this will absolutely curse us if we want to learn about inheritance and the cascade vibes. Let's get rid of that important. Okay, so our body is blue. All of our divs by type selector is pink. Let's set some more specific rules. So let's, I'm coming back to my HTML. And I've got a div, here the div P. I can set an ID as well. Because I want to see how these crash. paragraph div. These are kind of classy names. Yeah, yeah, maaf. CSS, yeah, enggak, yeah, it's hard, isn't it? Sorry, we've got somebody in the chat either speaking Malay or Indonesian, and I cannot really speak it very well. So, where are we? So we've got an ID. Let's see how these clash a little bit. I want to set a class selector, and I want to say, was it div p, that class? And I want to say the color can be set to white. Okay, so here, the color of the element inside, so the child element of my, let's look at this. So here, we've got a couple different things going on. We see that the color, we set the color here, the color, the div p class is set to white. And that means that it's applied this to the child element of this div class p. And somebody's saying, why is this working now? It's working because I took out the universal selector. We couldn't work out why it wasn't working. It was a little bit cursed. And it's going to be all right. So let's get even more specific. What happens if I say down here, I'm going to set another, I'm going to set a class for this paragraph. And the class for this paragraph is called example p. I'm going to set a rule for the example p element. I'm going to turn the color to purple. Before I do this, what is this going to do? Yeah, so it's not going to do it till I reload, but when I reload it, we're seeing that even though these are still both class level selectors, what happens if I change the order? If I say, hey, I'm going to do this one first, does that going to change whether or not this is purple? And it doesn't. And this is, I think, because we're being really specific. This is the class that just applies to this, so it's overruling. So I thought as well that this would be, oh, the order that we get them. But what's going on here, I believe, is that we're targeting the, when we set a rule for example P, we're overruling the inheritance that we would usually get here. Let's try it again. Let's apply two different classes. So we can have two different classes in the same element. So this paragraph class, we've got example P, and then we've got a class called class clash, if that's okay. Here, yep. So if we use, we've got two different classes applied to this paragraph element. I'm gonna take you out of the way. No, the div p, we're not worried about you right now. You know what? Let's actually move. Let's set another class. Or we could do, and this is really, really useful. So we could create another PLM. Okay, so order on the sheet doesn't matter in this case, but order on the sheet can matter sometimes, right? Right? Oh, we were talking about the okay, this is a really good point. So when there are competing rules where something is setting them apart, so they have different levels of specificity, then that overrules where they sit in the HTML file, yeah? But, oh, and Edda is really helpful. Like, oh, you know what? The star one's usually placed on top, and this is for human readability. Like, if you have rules that apply to everything, you want to see them when you first look at that. But sometimes where we put this in order, it does matter. So if I've set something for example P, class right here, so I've got two different classes on this one paragraph element. We've got example P and class clash. And we could do a couple different things. I could so here we've got three different CSS rules, and they're all pointed at this paragraph element. Is that true? Let's triple check. Yes. So this paragraph element so here I've updated this so we see this in our text. Oh, y'all still hear me okay? Sorry, my headphones just made the very sad we're going to sleep sound. So I'm going to do just a little bit more and then I'm going to escape if that's okay. And 1 second. Hey, that's feeling okay. Y'all can hear me again. So here we can set different rules, and where this falls in the line will matter. I have, let's move this one to the end. Here, class, I want to set the color to red. I'll reload that. Let's get rid of you because that's more than I want to do. So here, these have the same level of specificity. And what's going on is your browser is coming in and saying, hello, I'm going to read from the top to the bottom of the CSS. And if I find a rule where there's another rule that contradicts it, I'm going to replace that. I'm going to overwrite that only if the new rule further down the page is more powerful or the same level. So here, our body, background blue, height and weight, these aren't going to change. Okay. The div, the background color is pink. Cool. Nothing is clashing with that. Here, we're saying the example P class, which I have set on this P element, I want to set the color to purple. But then as we come further down the page, I'm going to say, hey, the class clash class, which is also set to this element, I want to set that to red. Because our browser's come down and is reading the different rules one by one, we've given it a new rule. And it's like, oh, cool, I'll go do that. Unless the previous rules are stronger on our A, B, C, D scale. If I then come back and say, let's add an ID in here as well, yeah? And just so we don't forget, just so I don't forget. So here, we're letting ourselves know. And actually, do you know what? I'd like a little bit of, yeah, I'd like this to fit a little bit better. Um, Here, we see that these two classes are the same level of specificity. What happens if I do an ID selector here? Oh, the ID was P ID. And I set the color to orange. What's this going to do? Okay. Why has this turned orange? Yeah. And while y'all are telling me why this has turned orange, will it change if I specify orange by ID? If I set this to the ID level of specificity, will it change if I put it further up? It didn't. So right before I escape, what's going on here is we're coming in. Daniel, you've got my back here saying, hey, ID is going to override. It's got more priority. It's a B or C, D, B. It gives us a tally in the B. Absolutely. So I think the A column is inline styles. But yeah, this is going to be because it's more specific. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look. I'm going to come way back here, looking at our notes again. I really, really love to use like a little scratch pad to feel out, hey, what is happening here? What's going on? There are a ton more really good questions. What about this? What about this? What about this? I really like optional. I was going to say homework because I frame it as homework for me. But y'all are grown and y'all don't have homework. For me, I would call this stretch homework. But y'all, this might be interesting stretch solo work is to spend a little bit of time having a play with, oh, what happens when I blank? What happens when I blank? Inheritability and cascading is not the most exciting thing we can do with CSS. So, excitingly, tomorrow, when I abandon you and you have wonderful, charming, knowledgeable Carmen back, what we'll do is, what y'all will do, is learn more about styling lists, how we can do spacing, different, and we'll have another lab to play with. And if y'all want to read the theory as solo and start having a look at, oh, heck. Where's the instruction? Oh, because I moved this way over. I'm rubbish. To start working on a stylized to-do list, which is very, very fun. But if it's quite all right, I'm going to let all of y'all have the easiest possible day. And thank you so much for making time with me. I'll let you go and have real good time with Carmen tomorrow. Bye, all.